So hopefully, because this presentation um, is on GitHub, we won't have the blur issue.
Looking good for me right now.
Good. So what I mean by that is, and this link is in the presentation as well. Well, something's blinking. I don't know. All right. What you can do is click the same link. Now let's see if I click speaker. Oh, I'm going to slide that out of the way. So this is a new deck for me. In fact, I just finished it yesterday. And the impetus behind this one is, I work for Palo Alto. There's a big push right now, shifting left, right? So moving security earlier in the software development lifecycle. And so, my company, I think, does a good job, and this is not a sales pitch, does a great job of blogs and information about, it feels like very high level. So I'm going to make the distinction that it's the difference between logistical and tactical. So this is going to be a little more tactical. So this will be about things that you can do yourself to, and I'm going to take a little different spin on it, as you'll see in a second, but these are things that you or your team can do to hopefully increase your security. So as I was saying, you can follow along on Git pitch if you like. So this is the Git pitch format. Everything in this is clickable. So as I'm talking, if there's something you want to learn more about, you can see the links. The hyperlinks are blue. You just click that thing. If you think there's an issue, if there's something you want to discuss further, whatever it is, use the issues tab in GitHub. I think it's a great way to stay organized, and for me, it's a sort of dog fooding, right? It's practice what you preach. Oh, I want to point out that this may not look the best on a mobile device, but I think it does pretty well on a laptop, desktop. I don't know, like typically what I like to say is if you have questions, just interrupt me, but I don't know how that'll work in this format, so. Okay. Click. Okay, so this is me. It's a pretty fun picture of my wife and I. We like to go to security conferences together. I think that one is maybe ShmooCon a couple years ago. Pretty fun. So currently, as I mentioned, I work at Palo Alto. I'm a consulting engineer. So when a system engineer, a sales team, someone needs to interface with development, has a question, we're called in to sort of be SMEs on certain topics. So my team generally is SecOps, security operations. So we'll talk to you about your NOC or infrastructure as code, all sorts of things with a security spin. And in the past, I worked at Motorola. I was in cellular networks and space sector. I started in '98, made base stations. I was an R&D engineer at Nokia Siemens when Motorola Networks got bought by that conglomerate. And before Palo Alto, I worked at Salesforce. So we did basically ML models. So we would aggregate lots and lots of security logs and build ML models to like automate finding bad guys. enhance the capabilities of the blue team, basically. And down below, I went to school, so I have an MS in computer security, network engineering, so on. And I can barely figure out where to click on this. Okay, so shift what? Like, what does shift left mean? So it's a pretty simple concept. If you imagine, I like to think of it, if you imagine like a Cartesian plane, X and Y, where the X-axis is temporal, like time. So the farther left you went on that X-axis towards 0, it would be earlier in time. That's how I picture it. So the goal of shifting left is to address bugs and issues at the earliest, right? Because a lot of security problems are software bugs. It's just that simple. So if we can find and address these sooner, we can make more secure products. A little more to it than that, which we'll see, but we also want to shoot for alignment, I'd say, of security concerns and developer concerns, which are not always the same set of goals. So when I imagine a software developer, I think of someone who's, and having been one, someone whose focus, she may want to just get that code out the door, right? You're under pressure from project managers. You gave them an estimate. They turned around and told you that was a deadline, and you know, with respect to delivery dates. Where a security person is, hey, we don't want to get popped ever. We don't want to get embarrassed, right? So those, to the extent that we can, we should try to combine those things. So how are we going to do that? All right, let's find out. So how we do that, I think, is the main point. Right? I hear a lot of folks say, we've got to get a security person in the dev team. Dev team just needs to listen up and do what the, you know, do what the security person's recommending, and that's going to solve our problems. But I feel like I want to flip that on its head a little bit. Not, you know, I haven't read every book out there or know, you know, have my finger on the pulse of everything in the world. But in my mind, I haven't seen a lot of folks saying, hey, let's get security folks to start thinking like developers. Oh, I see a typo there. That is. And how do we do that? Well, that's what I'm going to show next. So I think one thing that was helpful, very helpful, coming from a sec dev team, was the use of Agile practices. So, you know, you hear this stuff and people mention Agile, and I don't know, it's tough because it can feel process heavy. It can feel like an added layer. Again, remember that mindset of, hey, I just want to get my stuff out the door. But if you can sort of pick and choose, like a la carte Agile. So let me say that a different way. Security teams can use Agile to align with development. But what I'm suggesting is you cherry pick the best ways of working, right? So don't go out and buy a book on Kanban and decide, hey, we're doing Kanban now, and force everybody to, you know, this very stringent adoption of process. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting it's a direction, not a destination, right? So learn about Agile. Pick out the things that work for you. Things that worked for me in the past, for example, were user stories. You know, that Fibonacci sequence of assigning points to pieces of work, letting people work on things that are interesting to them and they're passionate about, right? If you give your devs pieces of work that they don't understand, or it's a huge learning curve for them, right? You don't want to frustrate people either. So yeah. choose, I have a note here to myself, choose and complement the agile processes that work for your team. And we're going to move towards security as code. So another recommendation I have, open it up. I think there's a tendency to, when we create things, to lock it down. Not always, but often. You know, your tools are your bread and butter, and you don't want folks seeing what you're doing, sort of thing. I in my personal opinion, and after having done this for a few years, you want to solicit feedback and scrutiny. You want to, the more eyes you can get on this stuff, the better. Go to people you trust, get them to review your stuff, get them to give you feedback, open issues on your repo. We'll see a little more about that in a moment. Document your processes, right? Document your software, your ways of working. All this stuff is important because as you create it, you will identify gaps in it. As you bring new people onto the team, you'll have a ready set of things that you can point to get them up to speed. And I see the last point here, open source your tools. You know, a lot of times we're using open source. And I think part of the open source, not mandate, but that paradigm is you should give back, right? So you're taking, as Ron said, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And be fair about it. So give back to the community when possible. Consistency. I love this image. This is from the movie Casino, and so Ace Rothstein gets a blueberry muffin, and he says, you know, look at your muffin and look at mine, different amount of blueberries. So he goes down and tells the chef. I just thought it was funny. It struck me as funny. But what I want to say here is, a lot of times when I talk to folks about this stuff, they'll tell you one of their first things is why they can't adopt the process, or why it won't work for their team, or why it doesn't fit their way of looking at things, their way of working. But you know, you're not that special, right? You need to, again, it's a direction. Don't be too heavy-handed with it, but get some buy-in. You know, take these folks to task about doing things in a consistent manner. Because early and consistent alignment of these concerns between security and dev is important. I'm trying to get everybody to think the same way, a secure way, right? That's important. I think I messed these two up, but that's okay. Getting people to review your stuff, and it's tough. You can't make people review your code, but it's so important to have a second set of eyes on all your work products, right? Your documentation. You know, this stuff is how you represent, your team is represented to the world. And it's important that it be right. But I can't tell you the number of times I've done a small, quick 2-line change, something simple, and I'd looked at it so many times that I missed something extremely simple, something that, you know, you put it into this CI/CD pipeline, right, and it gets out to production, it's going to cause a problem. So I think reviews are important for that reason. It's a great way to shake out bugs. I don't know. It does create a trail of accountability, so you know who did it. You know who introduced a bug. You know who was looking over the shoulder of who introduced a bug. I guess the big takeaway here is don't skip the code reviews. You can force with a lot of these tools I'm about to show. Well, not force, but require reviews before stuff gets merged. 2, 3 people looking at the same code are going to find different things. All right. Okay, I like this. I like this picture because, um, we all feel like this. I have my days when I'm like, holy cow, we talked about this. We need you to do this, do that to keep things secure. And it feels like folks aren't listening or not understanding or single-minded, just trying to get the stuff over the finish line, hand it off to test. I'm done. Here's the stuff. Here's the stuff I promised. But that's not good. You don't want to be too overbearing. This authoritarian stance, like, you have to do it because I'm security and I'm telling you, and if you don't, I'll get the CTO on your tail. Like, folks are just going to circumvent your process. Folks are going to do the bare minimum. Folks are going to be overwhelmed if you give them too much to change too quickly. So the idea here is to try for balance. Get a buy-in from the team, your team, teams you're hoping to win over. Yeah, I have a note here about, so when I did work at Motorola, we had a very strict web proxy, and it was so strict, in fact, that folks spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to go around it. I think that's a good sort of case in point, right? So we need champions and partners, not subjects, not people just following our direction. So. All right, master the tools. So I think this is common now, right? Always be learning. Stuff is changing so fast. There are so many new tools. I have some go-tos, but there's so much. I think two things. You have to be willing to adopt a new thing, learn a new thing when it comes along, because stuff changes, right? And you don't want to be sort of left behind. But also you want to kind of keep your tool set up to date, I'll say. Yeah. One technique I like to do is practice locally. I'll show a little more about this in a second. But I practice some of these tools locally, and I use template repos. So what does that mean? I have sort of best practices in one place that I can use. So you clone the template repo, and you use that in subsequent projects. So for example, a template repo that I have has CI, which is continuous integration, set up in a certain way. It has a Python, let's say Python set of requirements for test. For example, maybe talks, linters, which we'll see in a second. Makefile ready to go with Docker, right? Like, I have sort of a reproducible best practice repository, if that makes sense. And if you find something that does work, you find something that is useful, you get it working locally, automate it. And I'll show how to do this in a second, cause GitHub to run that stuff for you. So yeah, we'll look at a little more at that in a second. More testing, yeah. Everybody knows about testing. Everybody gets it. Not a lot of folks writing tests. So again, with my Python example, I see a lot where, folks, developers, they want to make the thing work, and that's it. Like, here's my stuff, it works, gotta go. But I think the better way to do this is you hand me a Python script with 10 functions in it. there should be 10 unit tests, one per function. Right? You want to have what we call coverage. So the goal is to get, if you write something, you want to have a test that covers it as well. Excuse me. Looking around GitLab, Bitbucket, GitHub, whatever it is, there's a lot of code out there, but not a lot of test cases. I think this is bad because, putting on my security hat for a second, like this, when I think of this, I imagine this is fuzzing, right? So bounds and range checking on a Python function, sending something that I know it's let's say it takes an input of an integer of 0 to 100, or 0 to 99, and I give it 100. I know that I went out of bounds on the high side, like that's fuzzing, right? I don't know. It's where the goal of security and development align, and I think it's a good place to start a conversation for why testing is important. So yeah, this expands on that point I made just a second ago. Keep an eye on your test coverage. So the percentage of test coverage simply means, if I had 10 functions and test for 5 of those, that would be 50% coverage. Keep an eye on that. There's ways to do it. Again, with the Python example, there's a coverage module that will give you a great report. We'll see a different way to do coverage here in a second, but unit tests are important for those functions. Functional tests are important for interaction of functions, right? So let's look a little more at that. And a lot of times I'll run that with talks, PyTest. There we go. So this one is also Python. Okay, well, that's okay too. But you can see here I used a commercial test coverage. I don't know what you'd call it, a package, a suite, an application, a web app, we'll call it. And what they'll do is you give their application certain permissions on your repository. This one's GitHub, I can see there. And they'll give you a little badge and they'll tell you, hey, you have this amount out of 100% of coverage on your code. Kind of cool. I like this because with this, don't have to do the manual solution. It supports a bunch of different languages. Yeah, just that. Use the linters. So if you're not familiar, I assume most folks probably are. Linting is more like syntax checking, finding those misplaced semicolons. You could lint your JSON for unmatched square brackets, curly braces, whatever it might be. But my point here is take advantage of these free lint tools. There are linters for virtually every language. What I'm trying to say here, okay to opt out of some rules. So for example, I use a linter on my markdown. I may or may not care if I enforce a rule that says you can't have 2 consecutive blank lines. Right? So sometimes the rules can be a little too strict. And going back to my point of getting something working locally and then automating it. So let's say I decided to enable the linter in my CI, continuous integration pipeline. And every time Sally down 2 cubes over checks in code, she gets dinged by a rule that says she can't have 2 consecutive lines, blank lines. You don't want to frustrate people either, is where I'm headed with that. Yeah, here's that point here. Available locally. So Sally can run Pylent, she can run, the linter for whatever language, but also run it again. When these folks do check-ins, run it again against every PR, because what you'll find is people don't, I'm not going to say everybody gets lazy, but I am going to say people get interrupted for coffee breaks, they're working from home, their kid and their cat's in their lap, so on. So, yeah. Code owners. I like this idea. I haven't seen it much outside of GitHub, but essentially if you click this link, it will allow you to, oh, this is to the docs for code owners. So what I'll do a lot of times is say, okay, Sally, she is the engineering expert on Makefiles, so she owns that. Jimmy down the hall, he owns all the Ruby, right? He owns all the Puppet and all the Ruby. So inside a single repo, I can say Jimmy owns these directories or even these files. There's great granularity with this. You can wildcard it, you can tag specific things. The purpose is to auto add code owners to review PRs as they're submitted. So PR is a pull request, as you may know. So why is that good? So what that'll do is Jimmy and Sally will get a notification if people touch pieces of the code base that they own, which is what you want. Right? You want them to, they're the experts, you want them to oversee those parts. So a good way to increase accountability and awareness. And who to blame later. Just kidding, kind of. Okay, so this we alluded to a little before. So automating checks via continuous integration. So continuous integration just means, I think of it as the pipeline, right? So that path from my machine to production, from my team's machines to production. So we can do a lot with, and these are all links here that you can click. We can do a lot with these mechanisms that allow us to test stuff before it goes out. So let me say that a more better different way. We want to run those unit tests, run those functional tests, run those linters, build an RPM, see everything work locally, or excuse me, not locally, but in the pipeline before it gets to prod, before it gets to, test the environment before prod, whatever that pipeline looks like. Jenkins would fit in a slide like this. But I wanted to highlight tools here that were open source, and I think with the exception of CodeFresh here, they give you a 7-day trial, but these are typically free tools. GitLab CI, I think, is pretty cool because the CI came from GitLab, like it was integrated, built in. GitHub just recently, maybe 6 months, a year-ish ago, just came out with GitHub Actions, which really replicates a lot of that behavior. CodeFresh, great product, but commercial, so great support, very responsive, nice folks over there. Travis and Circle have been around for a while. Circle is interesting because they just came out with the idea, I think they call them pods. So my company has a pod, like a security pod, I think it's called, or Orb, excuse me, Orb. And you can use that to auto scan your stuff through our API for security. reasons. Pretty cool stuff. So a lot of thought goes into these pipelines. I'm sure folks out there are familiar. Whole presentation around that, I'm sure. Okay, so here's a CI example. So a couple interesting things about this image. You can see I have Travis CI, so there's one. This is CodeFresh, there's two. And I have in this one, in this repo, I have two different CI tools when someone made a pull request. And interestingly, this one is required. So if this CI, if this set of test cases runs but fails, the PR goes red, you can't merge it. Well, the admin can merge it, but most folks, you wouldn't want them to merge it. We'll get to this in a second. This looks good to me, pretty interesting stuff, but that's more of a scanner. But here you can see required statuses must pass before merging. Again, the admin can merge, but you want to force folks to adhere to the process as much as possible. Right? So if you have a team of 10 devs, I think, you know, at my last job, we had, I don't know, 50 people pushing code to some repos. And so a lot going on. You wanted folks to wait for these builds. Interestingly, my last line manager, you know, I would tell him, hey, we can do this, but it's going to take 3 hours. Every time, you know, you miss a punctuation mark, you push to that PR again, that build's going to take 3 hours. You know, his comment was, I don't care. That was interesting, I thought, because quality over time, I guess, had to be right rather than quick. So that's what we all say we want. We don't always have time for that. So scanners, I alluded to this a second ago, looks good to me.com. So when you do a PR, when we would do a PR and it would say, you know, be a very simple change, you could just type LGTM. Looks good to me. Don't have to say a whole lot about it. Simple change, everybody's on board, LGTM, approve. This is kind of cool because the company, the parent company, and there's a link here if you're really interested, I linked to the article about it. This company, Semly, is, I think, being bought perhaps by GitHub, Microsoft. And this is one of the tools that they make. So I'll be interested to see how this scanner integrates, becomes part of GitHub. Renovate bot, we'll look a little more in a second. Renovate's cool because it will validate your, we're going to see this with NPM modules in a second, validate the modules that you choose to use. Oh, and then GitHub security alerts, not to be confused with GitHub Actions. They also have one called security alerts. There's a link here. So essentially, same thing, it'll scan your repo and say, hey, I noticed you used this NPM module. There's a known issue with it, and we suggest you upgrade. Renovate, the cool thing about that one is it'll actually, the bot will open a PR, and all you have to do is review the PR, and if you decide, you know, it makes through all the smoke, sanity tests, everything, you can just merge it. Pretty cool. I'm fairly new to Renovate, but I like it so far. Okay, so here we go. This is a Renovate example of, oh, so it found a Docker file in a, I can't tell what repo this is, but it was a Docker file that it wants to bump from Python 3.6 to 3.8. Okay, so it opened a PR. I reviewed it. I approved it. Great. So pretty cool stuff. And free. They when I signed up for their service, they also reached out. They seem pretty cool. But nice that they do that for people. You know, free for open source. So okay, so this one is GitHub security alerts. And these are, I think, yeah, these are NPM modules. So this one, I pushed some older stuff and it found, it looks like 5 different issues with a severity here. Like, hey, fix your stuff, don't deploy this, don't get popped. So here I just wanted to show commercial scanners do exist. I like this one a lot. This one is a shameless plug for my work. The reason I like this one here, I wrote some Terraform. I'm sorry if that image is too small to see, but essentially this is a .tf file that provisions an instance in AWS, I think a CentOS host. But here on the left, you can see this greater Windows VS Code. So they released a VS Code plugin, and then I could, up here is typically where you see the files. I could right click the file and say scan it, and it, through an API, shipped my file off, scanned it for issues, and then sent back this message that says, hey, good job, we didn't find any issues. I like this because it's easy. I like this because there's not a lot of work on the part of the developer, security person, security developer, whatever role is looking at this. I don't like this because it's not required, right? This is elective. So this is someone looking at their screen and they may or may not decide to run this. I want the CI to run this. I want my pipeline to run this. So they do have a GitHub plugin. I could not get it working, but I'm hopeful. That's a reflection on me, not them. Yeah, so let's look at my notes here. Oh, I have one more note that just says, you know, for Terraform, you can run Terraform space dash validate via CI, right? Say in Travis, you can spin up a Linux distro of your choice. You can download Terraform. You can validate all your Terraform files. Yeah, that would give you some more automated solution. I mean, with the orbs in Circle, you can do a full-blown stand it up in AWS. I know Jenkins can do that too, but anyway, pretty cool. Okay, a little more time. I just want to say a couple more quick things. Have a plan. So it never goes like, I think it was Patton maybe that said plans are what you make before you go to battle. I'm butchering that, I'm sure, but things don't turn out the way we plan. Life happens, stuff happens. So what's your plan for when that happens? Well, in my case, I use security, and here's a link for it, with how to set this up. That's what this link is. But I have a file that says, hey, here's how to reach me, here's who to contact, there are no known issues, right? So this sort of lays out a plan for what happens when things go wrong. And you can also use this mechanism to issue security advisories. So if someone forks your repo, they subscribe to your repo, they follow you on GitHub, whatever, you can let folks know when you find something like we saw a couple screens ago, hey, this module has an issue, we're gonna update for that reason. Oh, I like this. So not just blue. So not just the blue team. These are links to some really interesting, I found them very interesting, blog posts, how the red team tests their own stuff. This is by a Twitter user called, it's actually _XPN_, but I think this is markdown, so it made it italic. But if you click this link, it'll take you to this person's blog. And this one, they actually, I really like this. So MD Sec Labs, a couple, maybe 1 or 2 folks from there, they run Cobalt Strike with GitHub Actions. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So because GitHub Actions can run Bash scripts, or you can run Python, or whatever you can kind of imagine. I use it to scan Markdown, like whatever the thing is. You can kick off stuff. You can call APIs. You can do interesting things. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. And like in the last, what, 30-ish seconds. Oh, there's a thing in here how to contact me. So my LinkedIn with all my details, my Twitter, Keybase is kind of redundant with those, but overlaps with those, but it's all there. Yeah, I just want to say, there's a lot going on right now. People are nervous. Be kind to each other. Be patient. Yeah, be cool. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone, for letting me talk to you. And thank you to the folks who gave me feedback, and my wife for keeping the kids away while I had time to go over this stuff. Again, please, if you want to leave me feedback, use the issues tab on the repo for this. And that's it.